Welcome back to Tipton Bros. Before we begin, I would like to start by apologizing for the gap in content. We plan on going headlong back into YouTube and posting far more frequently. With that being said, recommendations in the comments are helpful and always welcome. Now, on to the video. Today, we'll be discussing the top 5 surplus firearm options in 2021. This list is formed on a basis of cost, availability, and collectability. I must disclose the abundance and price of each firearm listed vary widely by state, and these are only my personal observations. So, take these thoughts with a grain of salt. Let's get into it. Starting our list out at number 5, we have selected the FN Browning model of 1922. Based on the previous FN model 1910, the model of 1922 was a scaled up version of its predecessor. Possessing a 4.5-inch barrel chambered in 7.65 Browning, otherwise known as 32 ACP. This slim blowback sidearm held a 10-round capacity. In addition, FN offered the model of 1922 in 380 ACP, reducing the capacity to 9. The model of 1922 was developed for use by the Kingdom of Serbs, Croats, and Slovenes, which would later be recognized as Yugoslavia. With an estimated order of 60,000 pistols, the FN model of 1922 would see extensive service spanning from 1923 to 1930. This would only be the first of many countries the model of 1922 would serve, seeing use by Greece, Turkey, Romania, Denmark, Finland, and France, with the list going on from there. Most notably, in my opinion, the FN Browning model of 1922 would see use by German forces during the majority of the Second World War, with the Belgian army surrendering the 28th of May, 1940. The FN factory, along with the Kingdom of Belgium, were now under German occupation. The model of 1922 would be churned out at a rapid pace to feed the German war machine until the eventual liberation of Belgium in September of 1944 by Allied forces. This would not be the last time the FN 1922 would see use by Germany, as it was once more called to serve by the West German police in the post-war period. Although this reliable sidearm would soldier on to current day through civilian use, its last official adoption would be by the aforementioned West Germans. The FN Browning model of 1922 is a well-designed, concealable, and comfortable handgun to carry and fire. It continues to be overlooked for more recognizable designs of the period, although shrouded in an equal amount of historical importance. Today, an FN model of 1922 can be had for between $450 and $800 or more, depending on condition and country of origin. Fortunately, the model of 1922 is still commonplace on the secondary market and can be found without much difficulty. In all honesty, the FN 1922 deserves its own separate video with an in-depth look into its backstory and historical footprint. If you're looking for a surplus pistol, don't overlook the FN model of 1922. Holding our fourth spot, we have chosen the Swiss Federale. Invented by a Swiss engineer named Johann Friedrich Federale, an employee of SIG, his rifle design would become a stepping stone into the era of smokeless powder, and an important piece of firearms development. Friedrich's first design, his model of 1867, while raw, still had the recognizable features of his later rifles, those being a 12-round underbarrel tube magazine fed via bolt action. All Swiss Federales are chambered in the 10.4 by 38 rimmed, a now archaic black powder round that at one time held sufficient power. Friedrich designed 7 models in total, with the core action and magazine system remaining unchanged throughout the Federale's revisions. The Swiss Federale would see use by the Swiss and Russian army, with the system later being adopted by the Kingdom of Italy. The Federale pattern rifle would serve in many bloody conflicts, including the First Italo-Ethiopian War, the First World War, and limited use in the Russian Civil War. Despite being well past its prime and undoubtedly obsolete, the Federale, both Swiss and Italian, served during the Second World War, although to what capacity is unknown. The Swiss Federale went through several updates as previously mentioned, creating 7 models in total. The 1867, the 1868, the 1869, 1869-71, 1871, 1878, and finally the 1881. Although there are 7 progressing designs, the changes are small and insignificant. The Swiss also commissioned the production of a cavalry carbine, a shortened and much handier variant of the full-length rifle. These carbines were produced in rather small numbers and could be quite problematic to find. An estimated 4,300 were produced, the production numbers of the full-length rifle dwarfing that of the carbine. The most common Swiss Federale that I have seen is the model of 1869-71, although the model of 1871 and 1881 are also prevalent. A decent example of a Swiss Federale will usually hang around $500. This, of course, will fluctuate depending on variation, maker, and condition. The shape of the Federale is bold to say the least, and once you know it, its lines cannot be mistaken for anything else. Although ammo is not readily available, reloading the Federale can be done with ease. This rifle, while dated, can still be picked up at a reasonable price and will soon become one of the favorites in your collection. I guarantee it. Now, onto our third spot. Coming in third, the Argentina Mauser, model of 1909. While one of the pricier choices on the list, the beauty of these rifles are seldom matched. Replacing the earlier Mauser 1891, the model of 1909 was a large-ring Mauser, closely based on the Gewehr 98. Although a close copy, it would forego some of the more unnecessary features. Mainly, the Longevizier sight, often referred to as roller coaster sights, opting for a simpler tangent leaf spring instead. These rifles would be produced by Deutsches Waffen- und Munitionsfabriken, or DWM for short, from 1909 to 1912. During production, Argentina would contract domestically and produce an approximate 80,000 rifles themselves, as a measure to save on cost. So, half of the production was completed by DWM of Germany, with the remaining 80,000 rifles being produced by Argentina, making a total production run of 160,000 1909 Argentine infantry pattern rifles. Two more variations of the 1909 would be produced, but in very limited numbers: the 1909 Cavalry Carbine and the 1909 Sniper. The 1909 Argentine Mauser would be chambered in 7.65 by 53mm Mauser, also known as 7.65 Argentine, an effective and flat-shooting round. As for usage, these rifles did not see much conflict, being adopted by Argentina and Paraguay, seeing their only true bloodshed during the Chaco War, a dispute between Bolivia and Paraguay for a contested area of land known as the Gran Chaco region. This conflict lasted close to 3 years in total. The 1909 Argentine Mauser would serve until 1959, with the last decade or so being relegated to training purposes. These rifles are largely in fantastic condition, due to their lack of combat use, and for that reason, they have always been some of the best-looking Mausers on the market. The Argentine crest is prominent on the 1909 pattern, and is one of the distinguishing features that make this rifle so beautiful. While not rare in any sense of the word, the 1909 Argentine Mauser can be a nuisance to get your hands on. They do occasionally pop up on the secondary market, and most often at gun shows. A good example will run between $600 and $900, depending on manufacture and overall condition. The 1909 Argentine Mauser is my personal favorite out of any Mauser variant, and that is for good reason. They are generally in fantastic shape. They are tack drivers at the range, and to many, they are the most aesthetically pleasing. If you handle one for yourself, I am sure you will come to agree. Now, for our second pick. Retaining the number 2 spot, the Type I rifle. The Type I rifle is one of my favorite firearms from the Second World War, and what I would consider criminally underrated. As some of you may know, the Imperial Japanese Army and Navy procured arms separately. This became an issue in 1937, as the Japanese invasion of China was in full swing, and the Imperial Army needed every Arisaka rifle they could get their hands on. This left the Japanese Navy without rifles, and unable to obtain any through domestic production. Left with no other option, the Imperial Japanese Navy would turn to Italy, contracting a total of 120,000 Type I pattern rifles. What makes these rifles so neat is that in essence, it is a Carcano-Arisaka hybrid. Based on the Type 38 Arisaka, the Type I uses a Carcano action but retains the 5-round box magazine of the Arisaka. The Type I is also chambered in the 6.5 by 50mm Arisaka cartridge. The Type I was produced in a 2-year span from 1937 until 1939 by several Italian arsenals, including Beretta. The Japanese Navy would eventually be equipped with the new Type 99 before the attacks on Pearl Harbor and the ensuing war in the Pacific, but the Type I rifle would linger throughout the conflict. Many Type I rifles were captured as trophies from the Philippines and the Kwajalein Atoll. These Type I rifles lacked any distinguishing markings, including the Imperial chrysanthemum. While the Type I rifle is considered uncommon, it's not popular amongst many collectors. The lack of distinguishing marks and odd history seem to be off-putting to many. In my opinion, no Japanese rifle collection is complete without the Type I. In addition, they can be had for a great value. The Type I rifle sits around the $400 mark, give or take $100 either way. They are truly a steal in today's market, especially the history that comes with each example. The Type I is a hybrid rifle that justly deserves more credit. Now, for our honorable mention. As our honorable mention, we have selected the Czech VZ-24. A prominent sidearm of the interwar period, the VZ-24 was the successor of the VZ-22 and the predecessor of the VZ-27. The VZ-24 utilizes a short recoil, rotating barrel action chambered in .380 ACP. With an 8-round detachable box magazine, this sidearm was compact but comfortable to wield. A few cost-saving updates and necessary improvements were made between the VZ-22 and the VZ-24. Most notably, the addition of a disconnector and magazine safety. Several milled parts were also found to be adequate when stamped, further reducing production cost. The VZ-24 was produced from early 1925 until 1938, when German occupation had begun. Nearly 189,000 total pistols would be produced, and while it is recorded that production stopped under occupation in 1938, remaining parts allowed for production to limp into 1939. A very large quantity of VZ-24s were used by Nazi Germany, and many you find today will bear Waffenamts, although this does obviously drive the price upward. The VZ-24 was also used in its home country, on top of many others, Czechoslovakia, Slovakia, and Finland, seeing a small amount of use in the Winter War. While this pistol may not be the most visually appealing, it surely is no slouch. Pre-war examples boasted nice deep bluing and either wood or black plastic grips that bear the CZ monogram. This line of pistols, including the VZ-22 and VZ-27, remain unappreciated. A good example will generally cost around $500 to $600, although a fair example could fetch far less. Check out one of these spotless handguns in action, and you will immediately identify what makes the VZ-24 so great. Now, onto our top spot. At our top spot, I thought I would throw you guys a curveball. The 1889 Bodeo revolver. This revolver, while simple, was effective and served the Kingdom of Italy valiantly for nearly half a century. Named after the head of the Italian Firearms Commission, Carlo Bodeo, this solid-framed, double-action revolver would serve the Royal Italian Army from 1889 until 1910, but unofficially until 1945. As was previously stated, the Bodeo is a double-action, 6-shot revolver chambered in 10.35 by 22mm, a somewhat anemic cartridge. There were no bells and whistles on the Bodeo, as unloading was done with the extractor rod one at a time. The same would go for reloading, as the loading gate would be slid down, allowing the shooter to load one cartridge, rotate the cylinder, and repeat. This was the epitome of a bare-bones revolver. The two variations of the Bodeo are purely aesthetic, but do change the appearance of the revolver. One variant was made with a solid trigger guard, as you would see on a modern-day revolver, and the other variation of the Bodeo was made with an unprotected folding trigger. This second variation is far more desirable among collectors. When it comes to conflict, the Bodeo has seen it all, being wielded around the globe. The Bodeo would serve in the Italo-Turkish War, the Boxer Rebellion, World War I, the Spanish Civil War, and the Second World War, amongst others. Although replaced many times, the 1889 Bodeo was a steadfast reserve weapon up until the conclusion of the Second World War. While dated, the Bodeos are still an interesting facet in Italian firearms history, and have the track record to prove their worth. On today's market, a Bodeo model of 1889 will usually run the buyer between $450 and $750, depending, as always, on condition and variation. I believe the Bodeo was more than deserving of our top spot. Thanks again for watching. Again, we would like to apologize for the lack of content, and we will be posting far more frequently than before. As always, I am no expert and never claim to be. A like is greatly appreciated. Until next time, on Tipton Bros.